We're here in the shadow of Center Block, and of course there are picketing workers here, public sector workers, and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, who has said that he would not support any legislation to force these workers back to work. But what do you feel right now could release or end perhaps this labor stalemate?
Fair contract. These workers are the workers that were there for Canadians when people needed help the most during the pandemic. These are the workers that delivered unprecedented supports, financial supports to people, and now they're asking for respect and dignity. They're feeling the squeeze of inflation. These are some of the lower paid public sector workers, and they're demanding respect, which I fully support. The whole New Democratic Party and the caucus is in full support, and the solution here is the government has to deliver a contract, fairly negotiated, that respects these workers.
Welcome to Orange Wave, your source for everything related to the NDP. I'm your host, Will Adams, and today we are going to be talking about the most recent PSAC strike. A strike by Canadian federal workers, a part of the Public Servants Alliance of Canada, has been ongoing since April 19th. The union is demanding that they get better wage increases, better working conditions, and the ability to work from home like during the pandemic, depending on the job in question. All reasonable things, in my personal opinion. Someone who's just answering their phone all day and nothing else doesn't need to be at the office to do so. However, Justin Trudeau clearly does not agree with that sentiment, as he's decided to let it get to the point of it being a strike to begin with. PSAC National President Chris Aylward said, quote, "We truly hoped we wouldn't be forced to take strike action, but we've exhausted every other avenue to reach a fair contract for Canada's federal public service workers. Now, more than ever, workers need fair wages, good working conditions, and inclusive workspaces. And it's clear the only way we'll achieve that is by taking strike action to show the government that workers can't wait."
It is a failure to increase the cost of the bureaucracy by 50% with poorer services. It is a failure to have 150,000 workers go out on strike, and the biggest general strike in 4 decades. But it is an especially incredible achievement of incompetence to do both of those things at the same time. Only the Prime Minister could pull that off. Now, our veterans, our immigrants, our small businesses, our taxpayers will be without services. How will the Prime Minister fix the government he broke?
Democrats are extremely disappointed that the Liberal government didn't arrive at a negotiated agreement with the Public Service Alliance of Canada. These are the workers that delivered unprecedented help during the challenging times of the pandemic. They deserve our respect. They don't deserve groans from the Conservatives. They deserve respect. These workers work hard, and now the government's got to step up. The government often talks a good game about a collective bargaining, but ends up doing very much the same as the Conservatives. So will the Prime Minister commit to not bringing in back-to-work legislation and instead commit to negotiating a fair deal for these workers?
Both Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh have been critical of the Prime Minister backing PSAC into a corner. Pierre Poilievre because he wants to label everything JT does as bureaucracy, and Jagmeet Singh because the NDP is pro-union. Regardless of the reasons, they are both opposed to the government not negotiating a fair deal. But there's one thing that Jagmeet Singh said in the House of Commons that I'm sure got your attention. Back-to-work legislation. Yes, there have been times where the government used back-to-work legislation on PSAC. The Prime Minister himself tried to table it in 2021. This comes from the National Post. Earlier this week, PSAC leadership gave the government an ultimatum to have a deal by 9 p.m. EDT on Tuesday, or 120,000 core public service members and over 35,000 Canada Revenue Agency workers will launch the biggest federal public strike since 1991. The union announced last week that its members had voted to support a strike after 2 years of contract negotiations with the government have failed to find agreement. A deal is still possible as the parties fight largely over wages. PSAC wants 13.5% for 3 years, and the government last offered 9% over the same period. and return to office policies after public servants worked from home during the pandemic. But over the weekend, PSAC began laying the groundwork for a strike, setting up trailers and portable toilets conspicuously around Parliament Hill, and a website to help members find the closest picket line. During the last major PSAC strike in 1991, the government tabled back-to-work legislation, just weeks after the work stoppage began, sending bureaucrats back to the office feeling bitter towards both their union and their employer. But Brian Mulroney's majority progressive conservative government had control of the House of Commons at the time, making the passing of such legislation relatively straightforward. The Trudeau Liberals currently head a minority government that has to date leaned heavily on the Singh's NDP's support to stay in power and pass key legislation through Parliament. The opposition Conservatives have voted against most Liberal bills and to a lesser extent so have the Bloc Québécois. But if PSAC launches its strike and the Liberals are compelled to turn to back-to-work legislation to end the stoppage, the Liberals will have to turn to either the Bloc Québécois or the Conservatives to push the bill through. Historically, the Bloc Québécois positions itself as a working-class party with a strong blue-collar base. The last time such a bill was tabled in Parliament was by the Trudeau Liberals in 2021 to end a strike at the Port of Montreal. At the time, both the NDP and Bloc Québécois called on the government to keep negotiating with strikers and voted against the bill. Aaron O'Toole's Conservatives supported the Liberals, arguing that a prolonged strike could seriously hurt the country's economy, all the while blaming Liberal incompetence for allowing the situation to fester to the point of a strike. On Monday, Conservative Treasury Board critic Stephanie Kuzy argued Canadian access to government services should not be hampered by the Liberals' inability to reach a deal on time with PSAC. Quote, "The only reason we find ourselves in the situation we are in is because of Justin Trudeau's incompetence," Kuzy said, before going on to take a swipe at the Liberals' increased reliance on consulting firms. One thing is clear. Canadians' access to basic and essential services should not be compromised by Justin Trudeau's inability to do his job, she added. But as of Tuesday, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has remained conspicuously quiet on the battle between the Liberals and PSAC, and his office declined to respond to questions about possible back-to-work legislation. But politics can make for strange bedfellows, and both Trudeau and Poilievre might align in a desire to compel bureaucrats to return to work, despite turbulent contract negotiations.
I walk to Burger King, then I walk back home from Burger King.
I don't like to use the right-wing establishment media for this very reason, because they often use manipulative wording, like calling a union bureaucrats, for example. However, if what they've written indicates anything, it's that Trudeau isn't exactly a blue-collar man. He doesn't want to negotiate right now, nor does he really have the ability to do so. He has shown in the past that he is more than willing to use back-to-work legislation on a union, only asking for what they are rightly owed. Conservatives are famously not for workers' rights. Pierre himself wants U.S.-style back-to-work laws. The NDP, however, will not under any circumstances vote in support of the back-to-work legislation. If they did, it would probably signify the fact that the NDP would be an irrelevant party, which they're not, as being a historically union rights party to the point that they were labeled communists by the conservative media. Right now, the Prime Minister is showing an unbelievable amount of incompetence. The union is not asking for much right now, just basic things that are easily delivered. Justin Trudeau, however, clearly does not want to help Canadians on issues they face. At the end of the day, the Liberal and Conservative parties are almost identical economically. They aren't pro-worker, and they're always fighting against the interests of workers and unions. Luckily, however, Jagmeet Singh is not like that. He is pro-union, he is a blue-collar man, and he is going to lift us out of this struggle, and he will help the PSAC union get what they are owed. Thank you for listening to this episode of Orange Wave. I am your host, Will Adams. I hope you have an amazing day, and remember, Jagmeet Singh loves you.